I am Sloane, 34 years old, and until recently, I thought my family only viewed me as an emergency fund. I was completely wrong. They saw me as a blank check to fund their delusions of wealth. Pay for my son's college expenses, my brother ordered, slamming an $18,000 invoice onto my plate. It listed a luxury dorm, a new laptop, and a premium meal plan. I told him it was absolutely not happening. A week later, I heard him tell our mother not to worry, boasting that after the big holiday dinner, they would corner me and I would pay. Mom simply nodded and agreed that funding them was my role. So I changed the rules of their game. On November 25th, they lost their minds when I finally showed them who actually owned their perfect suburban lives. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to family members who severely underestimated your worth and treated you like a walking bank account. The heavy cardstock invoice landed directly on top of my roasted asparagus. I blinked, looking up from my plate at my older brother Gavin. He stood over me at our parents' dining room table, adjusting the cuffs of a tailored shirt he definitely could not afford on a regional sales manager salary. "You need to wire that amount to the university portal by Tuesday," Gavin said casually, taking his seat across from me. "Mason needs the premium meal plan because he is doing 2 workouts daily and the standard dorms are just too cramped for his high-tech streaming setup." I stared at the piece of paper. $18,000. I pushed the invoice back across the polished oak table. "I am not paying for Mason to have a luxury suite and a brand new laptop, Gavin. You and Simone need to figure out your own son's college expenses." My sister-in-law, Simone, scoffed loudly. She swirled her wine in her glass, the heavy diamond tennis bracelet on her wrist catching the light from the overhead chandelier. Simone always made sure everyone knew she belonged to the most exclusive country club in the county. As an African-American woman who prided herself on breaking into ultra-elite social circles, she treated any denial of luxury as a personal insult to her carefully curated image. "Do not be so terribly selfish," Simone said, narrowing her dark eyes at me. "You are a senior partner at that restructuring firm. You make mid-six figures to clean up corporate messes. You have no husband, no children, and absolutely no expenses. Living a single childless lifestyle means you have a duty to your blood. It is incredibly unrefined to make your own brother beg for pocket change when you have a literal fortune sitting securely in the bank." "Pocket change," I repeated, keeping my voice dangerously quiet. $18,000 is not pocket change, Simone. It is a down payment on a house, and my lack of a husband does not make me legally responsible for the child you raised to be completely and utterly entitled." Mason, the 18-year-old in question, did not even look up from his smartphone. He just kept tapping the glowing screen, completely indifferent to the fact that the adults in the room were actively battling over his financial future. My mother. Patricia sighed heavily from the head of the table. She placed her silver fork down with a sharp clink. "Sloane, please do not start a massive fight at Sunday lunch. Your brother is under a lot of stress with his current sales quotas. You know exactly how demanding his job is right now. Just write the check. We are family, and family helps family out." My father, William, nodded in agreement, wiping his mouth with a linen napkin. "Your mother is absolutely right. You have more than enough money. Stop being difficult and help your nephew start his adult life on the right foot today." I looked at my parents, feeling the familiar cold knot tighten heavily in my chest. "Help family," I said, leaning forward aggressively. "Let us talk about helping family, Dad. Let us talk about how you forced me into $60,000 of high-interest student loans for my state college tuition." "That was very different," William muttered defensively, actively avoiding my intense gaze. "Times were tough back then. Times were tough." I fired back, my voice echoing sharply in the large dining room. "Times were so tough that the exact same year I signed those documents, you remortgaged this house to buy Gavin a BMW. You bought him a car right after he failed his freshman year of college. You rewarded his failure with a sports car, and you punished my straight-A average with decades of crushing debt." Gavin slammed his hand flat on the mahogany table. "Do not bring up the past just because you are too cheap to help your nephew today. I needed reliable transportation for my first job. You were just sitting in a dorm room. I paid off that debt by working 80-hour weeks while you tried to look rich at the country club, I said, grabbing my coat. I build wealth by liquidating distressed assets. Giving you 18,000 is a terrible investment. I walked out without hearing another single word from them. I marched down the driveway. I reached into my purse for my keys. Nothing. I realized I had left my keys on the console table inside. Walking back onto the porch, I heard voices through the window. Gavin sounded incredibly frantic. "Mom, what are we going to do if I do not get $18,000 by next week? The repo guys are going to take the car. Simone will divorce me if she finds out." Patricia replied with a cold laugh. Patricia's laugh cut through the heavy oak door like a serrated blade. I froze in the dim hallway, my hand hovering inches above my car keys on the console table. My mother sounded entirely unbothered by Gavin's frantic pacing on the front porch. "Stop hyperventilating," Patricia commanded sharply. "You are giving yourself stress lines. The repo men are not going to touch Simone's car." "But Sloane just walked out." Gavin whined, his voice pitching high with panic. "You saw her face, Mom. She is not going to just hand over $18,000. She is getting ruthless. Simone is already threatening to leave me if she finds out I missed the payments again. I cannot lose this car. It is the only way we keep up appearances at the club." I held my breath, pressing my back against the cool plaster wall. A car. The $18,000 had absolutely nothing to do with Mason's luxury dorm or a premium meal plan. My 18-year-old nephew was just a convenient prop. A human shield used to extract cash from me to save my brother's marriage and his wife's manufactured social status. Patricia sighed, the sound carrying a heavy dose of condescension. "Sloane is just throwing one of her little tantrums because she feels unappreciated. We will handle her the way we always handle her. Do not worry. After the big Christmas dinner, we will corner her in front of the extended family. Your Uncle Arthur will be there, and Aunt Martha Sloane cares entirely too much about her professional reputation to make a scene in front of the whole family. We will press her on the importance of family legacy. She will write the check. That is her role. That is her role." The words dropped like lead weights into my stomach, extinguishing the very last flicker of hope I had that my parents loved me for me. For 34 years, I thought my success was a point of pride for them. I thought my promotion to senior partner, my late nights, and my financial independence were achievements they secretly admired, even if they never said it out loud. But standing in that shadowy hallway, the truth crystallized with brutal clarity. To Patricia and William, I was not a daughter. I was a contingency plan. I was a walking, breathing emergency fund designed solely to subsidize the golden child's extravagant failures. Gavin exhaled a shaky breath of relief. "Are you sure she will not fight back? She brought up the BMW from college today. She has a memory like a steel trap. Your sister is a workaholic spinster with zero emotional attachments outside of this family." Patricia sneered softly. "We are all she has. She will pay to keep us happy. Just keep Simone quiet and tell Mason to pretend he is excited about his classes. We will lock the trap at Christmas." A strange, icy calm washed over me. I did not feel the urge to cry. I did not feel the urge to burst onto the porch and scream at them. Instead, I felt the clinical, calculating detachment that made me the most feared restructuring partner at my firm. They thought they had me mapped out. They thought they knew my psychological breaking points. They assumed my desire for familial harmony would override my financial common sense. I reached out and silently closed my fingers around my car keys. I lifted them from the console table without making a single sound. I turned and walked out the back door, slipping through the garden gate and making my way down the block to where I had parked my car. I slid into the driver's seat of my Audi, the leather cold against my back. I did not start the engine immediately. I pulled out my phone. If Patricia wanted to use a family holiday to ambush me, I needed to change the battlefield. I was not going to let them control the timeline. I opened our family group chat, which included my parents, Gavin, Simone, and even young Mason. I typed a message with deliberate, cheerful precision. "Hey family, I just received an urgent scheduling update from the firm. I am going to be traveling internationally for a major corporate merger through the entire month of December. I am completely gutted that I will miss our traditional Christmas dinner. However, I want to make it up to everyone. Let us do a massive Thanksgiving dinner on November 25th. Instead, I am renting out the private dining room at Le Bernardin. A full tasting menu with wine pairings. My treat. Let us celebrate family properly. I hit send and tossed the phone onto the passenger seat. I knew exactly how to bait the trap. Simone could never resist a Michelin star restaurant. She would rather die than miss an opportunity to post pictures of herself, eating caviar in a private room at Le Bernardin. My phone buzzed almost instantly. The screen lit up with a rapid-fire response from Simone. "Oh my goodness, Sloane. That is incredibly generous. I have been dying to try their seasonal menu. I already know exactly which vintage Chanel dress I'm going to wear." "We would absolutely love to come," Patricia chimed in a minute later. "What a wonderful idea. Sloane family is so important. We will see you on the 25th. I stared at the screen, a dark smile pulling at the corners of my mouth. They thought they had secured their venue. They thought the ambush was simply moved up a month. But they had no idea they were walking blindly into a financial slaughterhouse. I reached into my designer handbag and pulled out the crumpled $18,000 invoice Gavin had slammed onto my plate earlier. I smoothed out the heavy paper against the steering wheel, turning on the overhead cabin light to examine it closer. The invoice looked incredibly professional. It had a university crest printed at the top, but beneath that embossed crest sat 9 digits that did not align with any known educational institution. I memorized those numbers before turning the ignition and driving away from my parents' house for what felt like the final time in my life. By Monday morning, the air outside my window matched the absolute zero temperature of my mood. I sat behind my glass desk at the restructuring firm 50 stories above the city. My eyes were locked on the dual monitors illuminating my face. As a senior partner, I had unrestricted access to global financial databases. I typed the routing number into our tracing software. I hit enter and watched the progress bar load. I expected to find a personal bank account. I expected a dummy account meant to pocket cash for a luxury vacation. The truth was much more pathetic. The query completed with a sharp chime. The screen filled with corporate registration data. The number did not belong to a university. It belonged to an offshore limited liability company operating out of the Cayman Islands. I clicked through the subsidiary links until hitting a registered domestic address. The parent company was Apex Auto Recovery. They were a predatory high-interest lending and repossession agency known for financing luxury vehicles for people with terrible credit. I sat back in my leather chair and let out a harsh laugh. The $18,000 was not for Mason's premium meal plan or his luxury dorm room. It was the exact amount required to halt a repossession order on Simone's Range Rover. Gavin was tricking me into paying off his wife's car. I picked up my desk phone and pressed the speed dial for our lead forensic investigator. Vance was a former federal financial crimes agent who now worked exclusively for my firm, tracking down hidden assets of bankrupt billionaires. He walked into my office 2 minutes later holding a tablet. I slid the fraudulent university invoice across the glass desk toward him. Vance picked it up and scanned the document. He looked confused. "Why is a senior partner asking me to look at a college tuition bill?" he asked. I tapped my manicured fingernail against the routing number. "Because that routing number goes directly to a predatory auto loan center called Apex Auto Recovery," I replied. "My brother Gavin handed me this yesterday and demanded I pay it by Tuesday. He claimed it was for his son's freshman year expenses." Vance raised an eyebrow and whistled low. "That is textbook wire fraud," he said. "Are you absolutely certain you want me looking into your own brother? Families get messy when you start pulling on loose financial threads." I stood up and walked over to the floor-to-ceiling window looking down at the traffic crawling through the city streets below. "My family has always been messy, Vance," I said, without turning around. When I was 18 years old, I applied for my very first apartment near my college campus. The landlord denied my application immediately. He told me my credit score was in the low 400s. I had never owned a credit card in my life. I pulled my credit report and discovered a string of maxed-out credit cards and a defaulted loan for a Yamaha jet ski. Gavin had stolen my social security number out of my mother's filing cabinet to fund his summer weekends at the lake. When I confronted my parents about it, they begged me not to file a police report. My father told me that pressing charges would ruin Gavin's future, and my mother cried, saying I was being selfish for wanting to destroy my brother over a silly mistake. I spent the next 5 years eating ramen noodles and working 3 jobs to pay off the debt he created, just so I could have a normal life. I turned to face Vance. My voice was completely steady. I told them to let it go back then because I was young and stupid. I am not young anymore, and I am definitely not stupid. Dig into Gavin. Dig into Simone. I want to know every single cent they owe. I want to know where they spend their money. Leave no stone unturned. Vance nodded sharply. His professional curiosity was fully ignited. I will have a preliminary report by the end of the day, he said, taking the fake invoice and leaving the room. I spent the rest of my Monday dismantling a failing retail chain in a corporate boardroom. I negotiated ruthlessly, firing incompetent executives and liquidating underperforming assets. I wielded my power with surgical precision. Every time a distressed CEO tried to make an excuse for their financial failures, I saw Gavin's face. I saw my father's face. I shut them down without an ounce of mercy. My colleagues noticed my aggressive shift, but no one dared question it. I was doing exactly what I was paid to do. I cleaned up messes that arrogant people left behind. At 5 in the afternoon, the sky outside turned a dark, bruised purple. Most junior associates had already packed up and gone home. I remained at my desk reviewing foreclosure proceedings for a commercial real estate portfolio. The heavy glass door of my office swung open. Vance stepped inside. He did not have his tablet this time. Instead, he carried a thick manila folder stuffed with printed documents. He looked pale. He walked over and dropped the heavy file directly onto the center of my desk. The loud thud echoed in the quiet office. I asked what he found. Vance sighed. You were right about the car, he said. But the auto loan is literally the smallest problem your brother has right now. He pointed to a highlighted statement. I pulled records for your nephew's 529 college savings plan, he explained. I looked at the balance. It is entirely gone, Sloane. There is a massive hole where the money used to be. I stared at the printout before me. $0.00. A college fund does not vanish. I told Vance to find the routing numbers attached to every withdrawal. My phone vibrated. The caller ID flashed with Simone's name. I answered after 3 rings. Simone launched into a sickly sweet tone. Sloane, darling, she cooed. I am hosting a table at the Oak Ridge Country Club charity luncheon this Thursday. We are raising money for the Minority Youth Scholarship Program. I told my friends my successful sister-in-law is coming. It would be a shame if you were too obsessed with your career to support a vital cause. Simone was setting a trap. She wanted me in a room full of elite socialite friends to publicly pressure me into writing that check. She assumed I would hand over the money rather than look like a selfish spinster in front of an audience. I smiled at my reflection in the dark window. I would love to be there, Simone, I replied. Send me the details. I pulled my Audi up to the valet stand at the Oak Ridge Country Club. The clubhouse was a sprawling estate of white columns and manicured lawns. I stepped inside wearing a tailored charcoal suit that screamed quiet corporate authority. The dining room buzzed with clinking crystal and polite laughter. I spotted Simone. She was holding court at a prime table near the center, surrounded by 6 impeccably dressed women. Simone was flashing her fake Rolex, gesturing wildly. When she saw me approach, her eyes lit up with predatory excitement. She stood up and kissed the air next to my cheeks. Lady Simone announced, her voice projecting loud enough for neighboring tables to hear. This is my sister-in-law, Sloane. She is a senior partner at a massive financial firm downtown. We are lucky she could squeeze us into her busy single lifestyle. The women murmured polite greetings, but their eyes swept over me with thinly veiled judgment. Simone had primed them. I took my seat and ordered a sparkling water. Simone did not waste a second. She leaned forward, resting her elbows on the white tablecloth. You know, Sloane, we were just discussing the rising costs of higher education, Simone said, projecting her voice loudly. It is devastating how much pressure it puts on families. Gavin and I are working ourselves to the bone to make sure Mason has everything he needs for his freshman year. It takes a village to raise a child, but sometimes the people closest to you are the ones who refuse to help. A prominent local judge nodded sympathetically. It is a tragedy when family members prioritize bank accounts over their own blood, she agreed, looking directly at me. Simone sighed dramatically, placing a hand over her chest. I cannot imagine having so much wealth and choosing to hoard it while your own nephew struggles. I guess some people are too career-obsessed to understand family support. She looked around the table, soaking up validating nods from her friends. She thought she had backed me into an inescapable corner. She thought I would pull out my checkbook and quietly pay Gavin's invoice to stop the public humiliation. Instead, I reached into my bag and pulled out my heavy leather checkbook. I placed it on the table. Simone's eyes gleamed with greed. She leaned closer, expecting me to hand her the money right then. I unclipped my fountain pen and began to write. I wrote out the date, I filled in the payee line, then I wrote the amount. $25,000. I signed my name with a sharp, deliberate flourish. I ripped the check from the ledger and slid it across the table. I did not slide it to Simone. I slid it directly to the judge serving as the charity chairwoman. I believe deeply in the value of higher education, I said, my voice carrying a crisp tone that silenced the chatter at our table. Please apply this $25,000 donation directly to the club's Minority Scholarship Fund. The judge gasped, picking up the check with wide eyes. Oh my goodness, Sloane. This is incredibly generous. The entire table stared at me in absolute shock. Simone's triumphant smile froze on her face. Her jaw dropped as she stared at the paper in the judge's hand. She stammered, struggling to find her words. But Sloane, I thought you were helping Mason. I turned my head and looked Simone directly in the eyes. I smiled, the sweet, chilling smile I used right before I liquidated a hostile company. I prefer funding students who maintain a 4.0 grade point average, Simone, I said loudly. I have no interest in funding Mason's 1.8 GPA or his luxury dorm room. Is that not right, Simone? The socialites stared at Simone, their expressions shifting from sympathy to absolute mortification. Simone's mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. Her face flushed, a deep, humiliating shade of crimson. Her carefully constructed narrative had just been incinerated. She was exposed as a liar with a failing son. I stood smoothing my jacket. I left $20 on the table for my sparkling water. It was lovely meeting all of you, I said politely. Please enjoy the luncheon. I turned my back on Simone's ruined social standing and walked out without a backward glance. The crisp air felt fantastic as the valet brought my car around. I handed him a tip and slid into the driver's seat, feeling a surge of adrenaline. I put my car into gear as my cell phone rang through the Bluetooth speaker. The screen displayed Vance's name. I answered the call, merging onto the main road. I have the entire financial trail, Sloane. Vance said, his voice tight with professional urgency. I found out exactly who drained your nephew's 529 college fund, and you are going to want to see this immediately. My Bluetooth connection crackled loudly as I merged onto the busy interstate highway. Vance did not even wait for me to speak. He launched straight into the details of the financial carnage. Gavin entirely emptied Mason's 529 college savings account exactly 3 full months ago, Vance said, his voice clipping sharply through the car speakers. Every single cent is completely gone. $120,000 was wired directly to an offshore exchange and dumped directly into a cryptocurrency startup company called Vertex Digital. I kept my eyes firmly focused on the road ahead. Let me guess, I replied, my grip tightening on the steering wheel. Vertex Digital is no longer trading. They filed for bankruptcy 12 weeks ago, Vance confirmed. The founders vanished with the capital. Gavin chased a ridiculous get-rich-quick scheme and completely wiped out his own son's educational future. That explains why he is scrambling for $18,000 to save Simone's Range Rover. He is completely broke and he is trying to use you to plug the holes in a rapidly sinking ship. I ended the call with Vance and pulled into my firm's underground parking garage. Before I could even turn off the engine, my phone rang again. This time, the caller ID displayed my father's name. William never called me during business hours unless he desperately needed something. I answered, keeping my tone perfectly neutral. Sloane. We have a serious problem, William said, immediately skipping any form of pleasant greeting. Simone just called your mother in absolute hysterics. She said you intentionally embarrassed her in front of her elite country club friends today. You threw away $25,000 on some random charity just to prove a vicious point, but you stubbornly refused to help your own nephew. I stepped out of the car, locking it with a sharp beep. I donated to a minority scholarship fund, Dad. I consider that an excellent financial investment. Your brother is drowning in stress. William snapped, his voice rising in volume. You are acting completely unhinged. Family helps family, Sloane. You need to wire that $18,000 to Gavin's account by tonight. Do not make this a larger issue than it needs to be. I walked toward the elevator banks. Why does Gavin need $18,000 from me when he has Mason's 529 college savings plan? I asked lightly. There should be well over $100,000 in that account by now. More than enough to cover a premium meal plan and a luxury dorm. A heavy, suffocating silence fell over the line. I stepped into the elevator and pressed the button for the 50th floor. When William finally spoke, his voice dropped an octave, adopting a slow, measured cadence. The stock market took a massive hit last quarter, Sloane. Gavin's financial advisor made some aggressive trades with the college fund and the market crashed. It was completely unavoidable. The money is gone. That is why we are asking you to step up. I closed my eyes as the elevator shot upward. I knew that exact tone of voice. It was the same smooth, patronizing cadence my father used when I was 22 years old. I had worked tirelessly through high school and college, saving $10,000 in a joint childhood savings account to pay for my master's degree. When I went to the local bank to withdraw the funds for tuition, the teller handed me a receipt showing a zero balance. I confronted my father that evening. He used that exact same measured, unapologetic tone to tell me the bank had made an administrative error and temporarily frozen the funds. A week later, I saw the receipt from a luxury jeweler sitting on his desk. He had drained my entire life savings to buy Gavin a diamond engagement ring for Simone because my irresponsible brother had blown his own salary on designer clothes. William had stolen my future to fund Gavin's romance, and he had looked me dead in the eye and lied about a bank error. Now, he was lying about a stock market crash to cover up a spectacular cryptocurrency disaster. The stock market crashed, I repeated, stepping out of the elevator and marching down the glass-walled corridor toward my corner office. I must have missed that in the financial news today, Dad. Tell Gavin I am not writing him a check. Figure it out yourselves. I hung up the phone before he could launch into another aggressive tirade about family loyalty. I pushed open the heavy wooden door to my office. Vance was already standing beside my desk. He did not look triumphant about cracking the case. He looked incredibly grim. He held a thin red file folder in his hands. I thought the crypto loss was the absolute bottom of the barrel, Vance said, his voice unusually quiet. But I kept digging into Gavin's credit history. He needed capital to make that initial offshore investment, and his credit cards were already maxed out entirely. I set my designer purse down and looked directly at him. Where did he get the $120,000 to put into the 529 plan in the first place? Vance slid the red folder across my glass desk. He did not have the cash, Sloane. Gavin forged your father's signature on a power of attorney document. He collateralized your parents' home. He took out a massive second mortgage, dumped it into the college fund to hide the origin, and then immediately wired it to the doomed crypto exchange. I stared at the closed red folder, my pulse pounding in my ears. Gavin had not just stolen my money this time. He had bet my parents' entire house on a digital coin and lost everything. The bank was coming for the deed. Patricia and William were about to be homeless and they did not even know it yet. My brother had single-handedly destroyed our family's financial foundation. I opened the file and pulled out the legal paperwork. I ignored the fraudulent signatures and shifted my focus directly to the top of the mortgage agreement. The regional lender holding the paper was Oak Creek Mutual. I stared at the bold corporate logo. A strange electric thrill shot straight down my spine. The air in my office suddenly felt incredibly thin. I picked up the document just to ensure I was reading the text correctly. Oak Creek Mutual. Vance noticed my sudden shift in posture. "What is it?" he asked, narrowing his eyes. "Do you know this particular lender?" I slowly lowered the paper to the desk. I placed both of my hands flat against the cool glass surface. A slow, calculating smile spread across my face. I did not just know Oak Creek Mutual. I knew their entire internal financial structure better than their own board of directors did. Oak Creek Mutual is currently experiencing massive insolvency. I explained, my voice vibrating with dark excitement. They made a string of terrible regional investments over the last 5 years, and their toxic asset portfolio is dragging them into bankruptcy. They are bleeding massive amounts of cash right now, Vance. And more importantly, my restructuring firm was just retained yesterday to evaluate their entire loan portfolio for a massive corporate buyout. Vance stood up straight. His professional demeanor cracked, revealing a flash of absolute shock. "You are the senior partner leading the asset liquidation," he said. I nodded slowly. As the lead restructuring partner, I possess the ultimate authority to decide which distressed debts our firm would acquire and which ones we would quietly sell off to third-party collection agencies. "I do not just have to expose Gavin's theft," I said. "I have the power to legally own him." The senior partner meeting room was a sterile expanse of glass and polished steel. 12 partners sat around the massive conference table. Their expressions formed a uniform mask of corporate skepticism. I stood at the head of the table. A laser pointer rested in my hand. I projected the financial autopsy of Oak Creek Mutual onto the smartboard behind me. The numbers were bleeding red. The regional lender was hemorrhaging cash. They were drowning under the weight of terrible investments and toxic secondary mortgages. I did not see a failing bank. I saw an unprecedented opportunity. I clicked to the next slide. I replaced the red deficits with aggressive green projections. "I am proposing an immediate hostile takeover of the Oak Creek Mutual Distressed Asset Portfolio," I announced. My voice cut through the quiet hum of the ventilation system. "We execute a targeted buyout of their worst-performing debt blocks. They are desperate for liquidity to avoid a total collapse before the end of the fiscal quarter. We can acquire their paper for pennies on the dollar. We can restructure the viable loans and aggressively liquidate the rest." Richard, the managing partner of the firm, leaned back in his leather chair. He steepled his fingers. He had built a career on safe, predictable returns. My aggressive tactics often made him nervous. "Sloane, this is a massive exposure of firm capital," Richard said. His tone dripped with patronizing caution. "Oak Creek is a sinking ship. Their ledger is a toxic wasteland of defaulted auto loans and zero-equity secondary mortgages. If we absorb that toxicity, it could drag our quarterly earnings down by 15%. The risk is simply too high." I placed my laser pointer on the table. I leaned forward, resting my hands flat against the cool glass surface. I looked directly into his eyes. "It is only toxic if you lack the stomach to collect, Richard," I countered smoothly. "Look at the data on slide 4. We acquire the debt at a 70% discount. I have already run the algorithms on the secondary mortgage collateral. Even if we foreclose on 50% of the properties attached to these bad loans, the hard asset recovery value guarantees us a baseline profit margin. When we restructure the remaining viable debt, we are looking at a 40% net return on investment within exactly 12 months. Murmurs rippled around the conference table. 40% was a staggering number. It made even the most conservative partners sit up straighter. But Richard shook his head. He refused to concede the floor. You are talking about thousands of individual debt profiles, Sloane. The sheer administrative nightmare of sorting through those ledgers, identifying the viable collateral, and executing foreclosures on that scale is monumental. You are a senior partner. You do not have the personal bandwidth to babysit a regional bank and its garbage pile. We need you focused on the upcoming tech mergers. You are grossly underestimating the absolute chaos of cleaning up this kind of profound financial incompetence. I let out a short, sharp laugh that echoed against the glass walls. I am not underestimating anything, I fired back. My voice dropped to a dangerous, steady whisper. I spent the entire first decade of my adult life managing profound financial incompetence. I did not just wake up with a senior partnership, Richard. While my peers were backpacking through Europe, I was untangling the disastrous financial webs of my own family. I spent years negotiating with aggressive creditors, fighting off predatory lenders, and restructuring massive debts just to keep my parents from losing their home the first time around, because they allowed my brother to treat their bank accounts like a bottomless casino. I know exactly how these desperate, over-leveraged people think. I know how they hide their money. I know exactly how they react when the walls close in. I cleaned up a lifetime of my family and their toxic financial waste. I can certainly clean up this regional bank ledger before the end of the year. The boardroom fell completely silent. My colleagues stared at me, absorbing the raw, unfiltered truth of my statement. I never spoke about my family in the office. I kept my personal life locked in a vault. The fact that I weaponized my own traumatic backstory to guarantee a corporate buyout left them entirely speechless. I pulled a thick stack of finalized purchase agreements from my leather portfolio. I dropped them onto the table. I have already mapped out the entire liquidation strategy, I said. My tone shifted back to pure, unyielding business. I have isolated the most profitable debt blocks. I just need the board authorization to release the capital. We strike now while Oak Creek is bleeding, or we leave 40% returns on the table for a rival firm to snatch up. Richard looked at the purchase agreements. He looked around the table at the other 11 partners. One by one, they nodded. The financial logic was completely undeniable. Richard picked up his gold fountain pen and signed the authorization line. "The portfolio is yours, Sloane," he said. "Do not make me regret this." I smiled thinly. "You will not." 72 hours later, the hostile acquisition was officially complete. The transfer of assets went through smoothly. Oak Creek Mutual surrendered their distressed debt portfolios directly to our restructuring firm. I sat in my corner office watching the encrypted data files populate onto my secure local server. Vance stood quietly by the doorway, holding a fresh cup of coffee. "It is done," Vance said. Watching the progress bar hit 100%, we officially own their debt. Every terrible auto loan, every defaulted credit line, and every underwater mortgage. I bypassed the general ledger and opened the specific data block containing the secondary mortgages. I ran a quick search function, typing in the address of my parents. The file populated instantly. I specifically assigned myself as the sole administrator of his debt. I pulled onto the sweeping circular driveway of Gavin and Simone's estate. It was exactly 2 weeks before Thanksgiving. The autumn air was crisp and biting. I grabbed the white bakery box from the passenger seat. I decided to drop by unannounced under the guise of delivering a pecan pie for the holiday. The reality was, I wanted to see the grand illusion up close. I walked up the brick steps and pushed open the heavy mahogany front door. The foyer echoed with the clinking of crystal glasses and the low hum of expensive jazz music. Simone was hosting one of her signature pre-holiday cocktail hours. The living room was packed with her elite socialite circle. Waitstaff in crisp white shirts circulated with silver trays of champagne and caviar appetizers. It was a flawless performance of immense wealth and profound denial. Simone spotted me immediately. Her eyes narrowed for a split second before she plastered on a brilliant camera-ready smile. She excused herself from a group of wealthy wives and glided toward me. "Sloane, darling," she cooed loudly. Her voice was designed to carry across the crowded room. What an unexpected surprise. I held up the white bakery box. I was in the neighborhood and thought I would bring dessert for the holiday preparations, I said smoothly. Simone took the box with a perfectly manicured hand. As she reached out, the sleeve of her silk blouse slipped back. A diamond-encrusted Rolex gleamed on her wrist. The stones caught the light of the massive chandelier overhead. I recognized the model instantly. It retailed for over $40,000. That is a stunning timepiece, Simone, I remarked. My voice was completely devoid of sarcasm. Her smile widened into a smug, triumphant grin. She adjusted the heavy watch so it caught even more light. Gavin surprised me with it yesterday, she announced proudly. He has been incredibly successful. In fact, we just secured a massive private loan to cover Mason's entire college tuition and his luxury dorm room. It is amazing what a high net worth portfolio can do for a family's credit rating. We certainly do not need to rely on outside charity from relatives anymore. She looked at me with thinly veiled venom, referencing the country club luncheon. I nodded, keeping my expression perfectly polite. I knew exactly what that massive private loan actually was. Vance had sent me the credit alerts just that morning. Gavin was rapidly opening multiple credit cards and taking out cash advances to pay off the minimum balances on older accounts. It was a textbook credit card kiting scheme. He was essentially juggling burning dynamite to fund a fake Rolex and college tuition. I smiled at Simone. I am absolutely thrilled for your success, I said softly. I am sure Gavin worked very hard to secure that kind of financing. I knew the repo men were actively searching for her Range Rover. I knew the credit card companies were days away from freezing all their accounts. I just sipped my sparkling water and watched her parade around the room, completely oblivious to the financial guillotine suspended directly over her head. Before Simone could offer another backhanded compliment, Gavin appeared in the hallway. His face was flushed bright red. He wore a tailored suit, but his collar was unbuttoned, and sweat coated his forehead. He grabbed my elbow with a tight, bruising grip. "Sloane," he muttered. His voice was a harsh, desperate whisper. "We need to talk right now." He pulled me forcefully away from the busy party and dragged me down the corridor into his private study. He slammed the heavy oak door shut, cutting off the soft jazz music and the polite laughter. He turned to face me. The mask of the successful executive instantly vanished. He looked exactly like a cornered animal. "Where is my $18,000? He demanded. His chest heaved as he breathed heavily. "I told you I needed that wire transfer immediately." I stood perfectly still. I smoothed the sleeve of my charcoal suit. "I already gave you my definitive answer, Gavin," I replied coldly. "I am not funding your lavish lifestyle." His eyes widened with frantic, unpredictable rage. "You arrogant, selfish witch," he snarled. "You think you are so brilliant sitting in your high glass tower. You think you can just watch us struggle and do absolutely nothing. Well, I found out exactly what your restructuring firm has been doing this week." My heart remained completely steady, but my mind raced. Gavin paced across the dark rug in his study. "My financial advisor called me this morning." Gavin continued, his voice dripping with venom. "He told me that Oak Creek Mutual just sold off their distressed debt portfolios. And guess whose name was listed as the senior partner on the acquisition paperwork?" He stopped pacing and pointed a trembling finger directly at my face. "You bought my secondary mortgage. You bought the paper on Mom and Dad's house." I did not blink. I stared at his sweating, desperate face. He took a step closer, invading my space. "You are going to wire me that $18,000 by Thanksgiving morning," Gavin hissed. "And then you are going to quietly tear up that mortgage agreement. If you do not do what I say, I am going to march into the dining room on Thanksgiving and tell Mom and Dad everything. I am going to tell them that their ruthless, greedy daughter bought the debt on their family home and is actively planning to foreclose on them and throw them out into the street. I will tell them you are legally attempting to steal their house from right under their noses." I looked at my older brother. He forged our father's signature. He collateralized their home to fund his gambling and crypto failures. Now he was projecting his criminal fraud directly onto me. He believed he could manipulate the narrative and make me the villain in front of our parents. A chilling smile crept across my face. I looked directly into his panicked eyes. I accepted his challenge completely. "I will see you at Thanksgiving dinner, Gavin," I whispered. I returned to my corner office the following morning with a singular burning focus. I bypassed my usual morning meetings, locked my door, poured a cup of dark coffee, and went straight to my secure computer terminal. As the lead restructuring partner, I possessed the absolute authority to expedite the processing of any acquired asset in the Oak Creek Mutual portfolio. I pulled up the secondary mortgage tied to my parents' large estate. The ledger clearly showed 3 consecutive missed payments. Gavin had abandoned the financial obligations the exact moment his offshore crypto exchange collapsed. Under standard operating procedure, a grace period might be extended to a struggling homeowner. I did not grant grace periods to thieves. I immediately flagged the account for accelerated default. I drafted the formal notice of foreclosure myself, ensuring every legal requirement was perfectly satisfied to prevent any future loopholes. I routed the document to my senior paralegal with a strict, uncompromising directive. The certified delivery had to be timed flawlessly. I wanted the official bank notice arriving at my parents' front door on the exact morning of Thanksgiving. They would sign for their financial execution right before pulling the turkey out of the oven. I pressed the final execution key on my keyboard and watched the status bar turn solid green. The lethal financial trap was now officially and permanently locked tight. My desk phone flashed with a new voicemail notification. I pressed the speaker button and leaned back in my leather chair. Patricia's voice echoed through my office, crisp and dripping with practiced condescension. "Sloane?" My mother began her tone, masking a distinct underlying threat. "We expect you at the house precisely at 2 in the afternoon this Thursday for Thanksgiving dinner. Please make an effort to wear something appropriate for once. We will be having a family financial planning session immediately following dessert. Bring your checkbook. Your brother is under an immense amount of pressure, and it is time you finally contributed your fair share to this family." I deleted the message with a tap of my finger. The absolute audacity was staggering. Patricia had spent my entire life treating me like a broken, defective accessory while endlessly elevating Gavin to the undisputed status of a living god. When I bought my first luxury vehicle, she criticized the color. When Gavin leased a sports car he could not afford, she praised his refined taste. Now she was ordering me to bring my checkbook to a holiday dinner so I could be ambushed and bullied into handing over my hard-earned wealth to save her golden child. They honestly believed I was weak enough to cave under the weight of traditional family guilt. I smiled a cold, calculating smile at the sheer predictability of her manipulation. I picked up my cell phone and dialed a highly classified number. In the ruthless world of corporate restructuring, you naturally build a network of specialized professionals. I bypassed my usual corporate security contacts and called Marcus. Marcus was an off-duty detective specializing exclusively in complex financial crimes and wire fraud. He answered the secure line on the second ring. "I need to hire you for a private personal engagement this Thursday," I stated plainly, keeping my voice completely steady. "You are going to be my +1 for a family Thanksgiving dinner." Marcus remained completely silent for a brief second before confirming his absolute availability. I laid out the exact parameters of the evening. He was not just attending to eat turkey and make polite small talk with my parents. I needed a verified, credentialed law enforcement witness, actively sitting in the room when the inevitable financial bloodbath occurred. I explained the forged power of attorney, the fraudulent secondary mortgage, and the offshore cryptocurrency wire transfers. Marcus understood the assignment immediately. He knew exactly how to secure physical evidence and handle hostile suspects who realized they were facing massive federal prison sentences. We established our cover story. He would play the role of my new, highly successful boyfriend. He would wear a tailored suit, smile politely at my parents, and wait patiently for my specific signal to drop the heavy hammer on my brother. The crisp morning of November 25th finally arrived. The autumn sky was gray and heavy, with the distinct promise of freezing rain. I stood in front of my bedroom mirror and carefully selected my armor for the day. I deliberately and completely ignored Patricia's aggressive demand to wear something traditionally appropriate for a family holiday. Instead, I chose a flawlessly tailored emerald green power suit that screamed absolute corporate dominance. I slipped on my heavy diamond earrings and secured a luxury platinum watch around my wrist. I wanted my family to see exactly how much immense wealth they could never touch. I walked into my quiet, sunlit home office and picked up a heavy, sleek black leather portfolio from my wide mahogany desk. This single object was my ultimate weapon. I opened the heavy cover to verify the contents one last time before leaving. On the left side, I placed the certified copies of the Oak Creek Mutual foreclosure documents, clearly showing my restructuring firm as the new holding entity of their entire property. In the center compartment, I secured the fraudulent secondary mortgage agreement, highlighting the forged signatures of my parents and the shady notary stamp belonging to Gavin's desperate poker buddy. On the far right side, I neatly clipped the offshore bank routing numbers, proving the exact destination of the stolen funds. Every single piece of paper contained within this folder represented an undeniable nail in Gavin's structural coffin. I closed the black leather folder with a satisfying sharp snap. I confidently grabbed my heavy car keys and walked directly out the front door into the freezing morning air. The long, exhausting game of family deception was finally over, and I was proudly holding the absolute winning hand. I climbed into my luxury car, absolutely ready for war. The valet at the restaurant opened my luxury car door. I handed him the keys and stepped onto the polished cobblestone. Marcus stood waiting under the grand brass awning. He wore a sharply tailored charcoal suit that expertly concealed the holstered badge clipped to his belt. He offered his arm. We walked through the heavy glass doors, and the manager immediately guided us past the crowded main dining floor. We moved toward the private corridor. The private dining room was a spectacular display of excessive wealth. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm glow over a massive oak table set with fine bone china and heavy silver flatware. I paused just outside the slightly cracked mahogany door. The sounds of forced laughter and clinking glasses filtered through the thick wood. We waited in the shadows for a brief moment. I wanted to observe the performance before making my entrance. My parents, William and Patricia, sat at the head of the table. Patricia wore a rigid pearls and cashmere ensemble. She looked like a monarch waiting to collect taxes. Gavin and Simone burst through the opposite private entrance a few seconds later. They were intentionally loud and aggressively obnoxious. Simone was draped in head-to-toe Chanel. The thick tweed fabric looked suffocating. She immediately snapped her fingers at the hovering sommelier. "We require your absolute most expensive vintage," she demanded. Her voice pierced the quiet elegance of the room. "Bring the expensive champagne immediately. We are celebrating massive family success today." I pushed the heavy door open. The thick oak swung silently on its hinges. Marcus and I stepped into the private room. The forced laughter died instantly. Every single eye locked onto us. My emerald green suit commanded immediate attention. I held my sleek black leather portfolio firmly in my left hand. Patricia immediately scowled, her perfectly manicured eyebrows pulled together in a harsh line of absolute disapproval. She glared at Marcus before turning her hostile gaze back to me. "Sloane." "What is the meaning of this?" Patricia demanded. Her voice dripped with aristocratic venom. "I clearly stated this was a private family discussion. We are dealing with sensitive financial planning. You have absolutely no right to bring a total stranger into this room. This is entirely inappropriate." I kept my posture perfectly straight. I did not break eye contact with my mother. I offered a razor-thin smile. "This is Marcus Hayes," I announced smoothly. My voice was perfectly calibrated to slice through the heavy tension. "He is a forensic analyst. I thought his specific expertise would be incredibly useful for our family financial planning session today." Marcus nodded politely. "It is a pleasure to meet the family," he said. His tone was perfectly pleasant, but his sharp eyes were already scanning the room and cataloging every single reaction. William shifted uncomfortably in his high-backed leather chair. "A forensic analyst," William repeated. His voice wavered slightly. "Why on earth would we need a forensic analyst for a simple holiday dinner, Sloane?" I walked slowly toward my designated seat, holding Marcus by the arm. I placed the black leather portfolio directly onto the table next to my crystal water glass. I looked directly at Patricia. "I prefer to be thoroughly prepared, Mother," I replied. My voice dropped to a dangerous and precise whisper. "The absolute last time you demanded a private family discussion, you cornered me in the kitchen and relentlessly coerced me into signing away my entire share of the inheritance from my grandmother. You explicitly promised those funds would be used for a secure family investment. Instead, you quietly wired every single penny of my inheritance directly to Gavin so he could fund his lavish 6-week honeymoon in the tropical islands. I will never allow myself to be financially ambushed in a private room without an independent witness ever again." The silence in the dining room became instantly suffocating. The sommelier who had just arrived with the vintage champagne froze in the corner, unsure if he should pour the expensive wine or immediately retreat from the volatile domestic dispute. Patricia felt her face flush a deep, mottled crimson. Her mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. She looked at William for support, but my father simply stared at his empty china plate. The ugly truth of their past theft was completely undeniable. Simone clutched her quilted Chanel purse tightly against her chest. She looked nervously at Gavin. She clearly had no idea her luxury honeymoon had been funded entirely by my stolen inheritance. Gavin felt his face contort into a mask of pure, desperate rage. He could feel the carefully constructed illusion of his wealth cracking under the pressure. He needed to reassert control immediately. He grabbed his crystal champagne flute and a heavy silver butter knife. He stood up aggressively. He tapped the knife against the delicate glass. The sharp, clinking sound shattered the heavy silence in the grand room. He completely ignored the stunning revelation about the stolen inheritance. "Let us just get the ugly business out of the way right now before we eat," Gavin announced loudly. His voice was laced with panicked arrogance. He puffed out his chest and adjusted his silk tie, trying to project an aura of total authority. He looked directly at me across the massive table. His eyes were wide and manic, displaying the sheer terror of a man who knew he was entirely out of financial options. He pointed a trembling finger directly at my black leather portfolio resting on the polished wood. "We all know exactly why you are really here today, Sloane. You are going to do the right thing for this family. Stop playing these pathetic games with your fake forensic analyst boyfriend. Open that folder and hand over the check." I did not flinch. I rested my hands on the black leather. I looked at the man who had stolen everything from our parents. The ultimate reckoning had arrived at this table. Before I could answer his demand, Simone placed a hand flat against the oak table. She let out a dramatic sigh designed to draw every eye. She adjusted the lapel of her Chanel jacket and adopted a tone of condescending patience. "Honestly, Sloane, we should not even have to ask," she began. Her voice echoed off the chandeliers. "There is a concept called the village mentality. It means families support each other unconditionally. When one member achieves financial success, it is their moral obligation to elevate the next generation. You are a successful single aunt with zero dependents and massive disposable income. It is your duty to fund your nephew and his academic journey. It takes a village, Sloane, and right now you are choosing to be the greedy troll hoarding gold under the bridge." I looked directly at the supposed beneficiary of my mandatory charity. Mason sat slouched in a velvet chair at the far end of the table. He wore a wrinkled designer sweatshirt and expensive sneakers. He was completely ignoring the high-stakes financial warfare happening around him. His thumbs moved rapidly across the screen of his smartphone. He did not look up when his mother spoke his name. He did not offer a single word of gratitude for the educational investment his parents were demanding on his behalf. He looked entirely indifferent to the world. He was a perfect miniature replica of Gavin. He was entitled, disconnected, and convinced that other people existed solely to fund his existence. William shifted his weight aggressively. My father possessed a volatile temper he usually reserved exclusively for me. He had spent his adult life enabling Gavin and cleaning up his disastrous messes. He slammed his fist violently onto the polished oak table. The china rattled loudly and a silver fork clattered against a crystal water glass. The noise caused the hovering waiter to retreat into the main hallway. "You make 6 figures, Sloane," William barked. His face flushed a dark shade of angry red. His voice was thick with disgust. "It is sickening that you are sitting there making your own flesh and blood brother beg for basic financial assistance. Your mother and I raised you to understand the vital importance of family loyalty. We gave you everything you needed to succeed in that corporate tower of yours. Now your brother has a cash flow issue and you treat him like a beggar. We are entirely finished with these disrespectful power plays. Reach into your bag, pull out your checkbook, and write the check for your nephew and his college tuition right this second. Do not make me ask you again." Patricia nodded vigorously in eager agreement. Her pearls clicked softly as she leaned forward. "Listen to your father, Sloane," she scolded sharply. "We came here to enjoy a lovely holiday meal, not to watch you flaunt your selfish greed. Write the check, and we can finally order our appetizers." I sat perfectly still. I did not break eye contact with my father. I did not flinch at his aggressive tone. I certainly did not reach for my purse. Beside me, Marcus remained utterly silent, but highly alert. His posture was relaxed, but his eyes tracked every single expression around the room. He was cataloging the coercion tactics being openly deployed by my parents. I broke eye contact with William and shifted my focus down the table. I bypassed Gavin. I bypassed Simone and Patricia. I locked my gaze entirely on the slouched teenager in the wrinkled sweatshirt. "Mason," I said loudly. My voice was sharp and commanding, cutting through the tension like a blade. The teenager flinched at the sudden authoritative tone. He stopped tapping on his smartphone and looked up with a dull, confused expression. What he mumbled lazily. I rested my forearms lightly on the table. "What is your intended major?" I asked him directly. Simone lunged forward to answer for him. "Mason is looking at advanced business management programs, Sloane," she answered quickly. Her voice was slightly breathless. "He has a brilliant mind for corporate strategy." I raised one finger, silencing her. "I did not ask you, Simone," I stated firmly. My eyes remained locked on the teenager. "I asked Mason. I am the one allegedly funding this grand educational journey. I want to hear it directly from the source. Tell me about your college applications, Mason. Where exactly are you applying and what specific academic program requires an immediate $18,000 wire transfer by Thanksgiving morning?" Mason blinked rapidly. He looked nervously at his father, then back to his smartphone screen. He shifted his weight in the velvet chair. He looked incredibly uncomfortable under my scrutiny. "I am not applying anywhere," he mumbled quietly. The silence in the grand dining room became absolute. The ambient noise of the restaurant outside the thick mahogany doors seemed to vanish entirely. Simone let out a sharp, nervous laugh. "Mason, darling, do not be silly," she coaxed frantically. "Tell your aunt about the prestigious university programs we discussed last week." "I am not going to college, Mom," Mason snapped, suddenly irritable. He sat up straighter, dropping his phone onto the table. "I already told Dad 3 days ago. College is a complete scam for outdated boomers. I am joining an elite Discord group to trade crypto full-time. My friend made 50 grand last month on a coin launch. That is my intended major." Simone stared at her son in absolute horror. The flawless Chanel-wearing socialite looked as though she had been physically struck. William and Patricia exchanged highly confused glances. They had been aggressively demanding that I fund an academic future that did not even exist. The elaborate house of cards was rapidly catching fire, and the smoke was filling the room. I shifted my gaze away from the defiant teenager and looked directly at my brother Gavin. A razor-sharp smile crossed my face. "So Gavin," I whispered softly, What exactly is the invoice for? Gavin stood frozen at the head of the heavy oak table. His mouth opened, but the arrogant words he had prepared completely failed to materialize. He looked at Mason, and then he looked back at me. A visible bead of sweat rolled down his temple. He gripped the edge of the polished wood so tightly his knuckles turned a stark shade of white. The silence in the private dining room was absolute and suffocating. Even the waitstaff seemed to have vanished into the surrounding walls. I did not rush him. I simply sat there and enjoyed his absolute profound terror. When he finally attempted to speak, his voice was a weak, pathetic rattle. "It is a specialized preparatory program," Gavin stammered. He aggressively tugged at his silk collar. "It is an exclusive financial intensive for young entrepreneurs. You would not understand the complex structure, Sloane." I let out a short, sharp laugh that cut through his desperate fabrication. "I understand financial structures better than anyone else in this room, Gavin," I replied smoothly. I unclasped the silver lock on my black leather portfolio. The heavy cover fell open with a dull thud against the hard, polished wooden table below it. I reached into the center compartment and pulled out a single sheet of thick, high-quality paper. It was a blown-up printout of the exact $18,000 invoice he had demanded I pay. I placed my hand flat over the document and slowly slid it across the polished oak table. The paper moved with a harsh, scratching sound that echoed in the quiet room. It stopped directly in front of William and Patricia. I verified the account details with all the international banking registries I announced. My voice was completely steady, and it projected absolute, unwavering, lethal corporate authority. I leaned forward slightly. "This invoice does not go to a university. It does not go to a specialized preparatory program. It does not go to an exclusive financial intensive for young entrepreneurs." I tapped my manicured fingernail against the table. I ran the routing number, Gavin. "This does not go to a university. It goes directly to a shell corporation operating under the name Apex Auto Recovery." Gavin dropped his gaze to the floor. The remaining color drained entirely from his face. "You are actively trying to use me to pay off your immediate automobile repossession fee right now." "You are using me to pay off the repossession fee on Simone and her luxury Range Rover," I continued. I kept my tone dangerously even. "You fell 3 months behind on your vehicle payments because you drained your liquid assets to cover your catastrophic cryptocurrency losses. The recovery agents were actively hunting for the vehicle all week. You fabricated a fake academic invoice and tried to manipulate my family loyalty to extort $18,000 from my bank account just to keep your wife looking wealthy in the country club parking lot today." Simone let out a sharp, choked gasp. She dropped her crystal champagne flute onto the table. The delicate glass tipped over, spilling expensive vintage wine across the pristine white tablecloth. The golden liquid dripped onto her Chanel tweed skirt, but she did not even notice. She stared at Gavin in absolute, unadulterated horror. Her jaw dropped completely open in shock. "You told me the bank made a simple administrative error," Simone shrieked. Her voice was shrill and completely devoid of its usual aristocratic polish. "You told me the dealership mixed up our account numbers. You never told me the car was in active repossession status right now. You bought me a $40,000 watch yesterday. How are we in repossession, Gavin?" Gavin refused to look at his wife. He kept his eyes glued to the floorboards. The illusion of his immense success was shattering into a million jagged pieces right in front of his elite family. Patricia violently slammed her hands onto the table. Her heavy pearl necklace bounced against her chest. She gasped loudly and glared at me with an expression of pure, unadulterated hatred. She completely ignored the fact that her beloved son had just committed blatant wire fraud against his own biological sister. She instantly lunged to defend him. "Well, he needs a car for work," Sloane Patricia snapped. Her voice was loud and fiercely defensive. "How is he supposed to maintain his executive image if he is driving around in a rented compact vehicle? You have millions of dollars sitting in your corporate accounts. $18,000 is nothing to you. It is pocket change. You could have just paid the invoice quietly and saved your brother this terrible public embarrassment. There is absolutely no reason for you to sit there and be so incredibly petty toward your own family members today." I stared at my mother in complete silence. I absorbed the profound sickness of her logic. She was openly defending a criminal extortion attempt simply because the perpetrator was her golden child. She expected me to happily fund his fraud to protect his fragile ego. Marcus shifted slightly in his chair beside me. He was silently observing the exact toxic family dynamic I had described to him in my office. He watched Patricia excuse a felony to maintain a social facade. I slowly shook my head. I did not raise my voice. I did not show any anger. I smiled. I smiled a razor-sharp smile that conveyed absolute dominance over the entire situation. "I am not being petty, Mom," I replied softly. My eyes swept across the panicked faces of my family members before locking directly back onto Gavin. The silence in the dining room became incredibly heavy once again. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the thick oak table. I looked right at the man who had stolen everything from our parents. I am just wondering why he cannot simply pay for his own luxury car using Mason and his missing $120,000 college educational fund today. I kept my eyes locked on Gavin as I reached back into the sleek black leather portfolio. My fingers brushed against the thick stack of bank statements I had meticulously secured earlier that morning. I pulled out a fresh packet of documents stapled securely in the top left corner. The prominent logo of a premier national bank was emblazoned across the header. I tossed the heavy packet onto the table. It slid smoothly across the polished wood and stopped right in front of Mason. I did not need to point out the specific line item. The bold black ink at the bottom of the first page was impossible to miss. It clearly labeled the account as a 529 college savings plan. The total balance printed next to it was exactly $0.00. Mason stared down at the paper. For the first time all evening, his expensive smartphone dropped completely out of his hands and clattered loudly against the table. The indifferent teenager facade instantly vanished. His mouth fell wide open as his eyes scanned the prominent zeros. He leaned forward, gripping the edge of the heavy table. He looked from the paper to his father, and then back to the paper. The color drained entirely from his face, leaving behind a pale mask of absolute shock. "Wait a minute," Mason said. His voice was loud and cracking with sudden, intense panic. "Wait, my college money is actually gone. Is this a joke? Where is my $120,000? Gavin instantly began to sweat profusely. Thick beads of perspiration formed along his hairline and trickled rapidly down his forehead. His breathing became rapid and incredibly shallow. He practically leapt out of his chair, reaching frantically for the bank statement sitting in front of his son. He snatched the papers away, but the severe damage was already done. The undeniable truth had been forcefully exposed to the entire room. He crumpled the documents in his shaking fists. "These are complete fabrications," Gavin shouted. His voice echoed wildly off the high walls of the private dining room. His eyes darted around the room like a cornered animal desperately searching for a safe escape route. "She manufactured these fake numbers. This is entirely fraudulent. You all know exactly what she does for a living. She works in high-level corporate restructuring. She hired some illegal computer hacker to break into my personal digital servers and create these fake documents to frame me. She is trying to destroy my family because she is deeply jealous of our massive success. I am the victim of a sophisticated cybercrime right now. You cannot believe a single word she says. My financial portfolio is perfectly secure." I slammed my right hand flat against the heavy oak table. The sudden violent sound cracked through his hysterical rambling and forced him into stunned silence. I leaned forward, resting my weight against the wood. My voice was a lethal blade slicing through his pathetic lies. "You emptied that entire account exactly 3 years ago, Gavin," I stated with absolute precision. My words were sharp and totally uncompromising. I tracked every single wire transfer through the International Banking Registry. You liquidated your own son and his entire educational future to fund a massive offshore crypto scam. You gambled away his tuition on unregulated digital coins, hoping for a miraculous payout to cover your mounting automotive debts. You are not a victim of a sophisticated cybercrime. You are a common thief who steals from children to fund an illusion. I turned my head slightly, shifting my piercing gaze to William and Patricia. They sat frozen in their high-backed leather chairs. I refuse to let them escape the blast radius of this brutal confrontation. Just like you emptied my personal savings account when I was 18 years old? I continued. My voice grew much colder and substantially louder. I worked 3 brutal jobs in high school to save $10,000 for my college housing. You hacked into my joint teenage checking account and drained every single penny. You stole my money to pay off your massive illegal sports gambling debts to a dangerous bookie. And Mom and Dad knew absolutely everything about the theft. They watched you steal my hard-earned money, and they explicitly let you do it because protecting their golden boy was always more important than protecting their daughter. They forced me to take out predatory student loans while they actively covered up your financial crimes. Simone shot up from her chair. The heavy oak legs scraped violently against the polished floorboards. Her face was contorted into a mask of pure, unhinged rage. She ignored my entire revelation about the past. She cared only about the immediate threat to her luxurious lifestyle. She pointed a manicured finger directly at her sweating husband. "You lost the money," Simone screamed. Her voice reached a deafening pitch. "You lost my son and his college fund on a stupid computer coin. How am I supposed to show my face at the country club? How am I supposed to explain that we are completely broke? You told me we were incredibly wealthy. You are an absolute failure, Gavin." William suddenly stood up. His massive frame shadowed the head of the table. He slammed both his fists down onto the wood, silencing Simone instantly. His face was a dark, dangerous purple. He did not direct his fury at his criminal son. He turned his complete burning wrath entirely onto me. "How dare you maliciously dig into his private finances?" William roared. His voice shook the crystal chandeliers above us. "How dare you bring these incredibly sensitive family matters into a public restaurant to humiliate your own flesh and blood? You are a total disgrace to this family, Sloane. We have perfectly handled the entire situation. Your mother and I took out a massive second mortgage to completely replace that stolen college money, so it is perfectly fine." I let out a cold, echoing laugh that bounced off the crystal chandeliers and oak paneling of the private dining room. The sound was devoid of humor or warmth. It was pure, unadulterated pity. I looked at William and then shifted my gaze to Patricia. They sat there fiercely defending a son who had systematically dismantled their financial security. "You took out a second mortgage, Dad?" I asked softly, keeping my tone even. "Are you sure about that?" William blinked. His aggressive posture faltered for a fraction of a second. "Of course I am sure, Sloane." He snapped, anger masking his hesitation. "The bank transferred the funds last month. I signed the paperwork myself. We handled it privately to avoid exposing family business publicly. You think you are the only one who understands finance, but you are mistaken." I shook my head slowly. The tragic delusion was painful to witness. I unclasped the center compartment of my black portfolio. I reached past the routing numbers and the zero-balance college savings statements. My fingers grasped a stack of legal-sized paper bound with a brass clip. I pulled the document out and held it up for the room to see. The crest of Oak Creek Mutual was clearly stamped at the top. I dropped the heavy stack of documents directly onto the polished table. It landed with a definitive smack that made Simone jump in her seat. "This is a certified copy of the secondary mortgage agreement from Oak Creek Mutual," I announced clearly. My voice sliced through the heavy silence of the room. I slid the thick packet across the wood until it rested perfectly between William and Patricia. "I suggest you look closely at page 14. Look at the authorization signatures." William scowled deeply, but his hands trembled slightly as he reached for the paperwork. He flipped past the complex legal jargon and itemized fee schedules until he reached the final execution page. His eyes scanned the bottom of the document. A deep, sickening pallor washed over his face. The angry red flush completely drained away, leaving behind a ghostly white shock. I did not give him time to process the betrayal. "You did not sign this, Dad," I stated. My words hit the table like heavy stones. "Patricia did not sign it either. Gavin forged your signature. He forged Mom and her signature right next to yours. Then he took these fraudulent documents to a desperate poker buddy who possesses a state notary stamp. He had his friend illegally notarize your forged signatures to bypass the mandatory identity verification process. William stared at the blue ink on the page. His mouth moved, but no words came out. He recognized the forgery. It was a close approximation of his handwriting, but it lacked his distinct sharp angles. Gavin committed blatant wire fraud to take $250,000 directly out of the equity of your home. I continued relentlessly. He leveraged the very roof over your heads to cover his catastrophic offshore crypto losses and replace the college fund he already stole. He did not ask you for a second mortgage. He stole it from you while you were sleeping. Patricia violently slapped the documents out of William in his trembling hands. The papers scattered across the tablecloth, knocking over a silver salt shaker. She refused to look at the forged signatures. Her eyes burned with a wild, delusional fury. "This is a complete lie," Patricia shrieked. Her voice cracked with desperate denial. She pointed a shaking finger at my face. "You fabricated these papers just like you fabricated those bank statements. You are intentionally trying to frame your brother because you have always been pathologically jealous of his success. Gavin would never do something like this to us. He is a good son. He respects this family." The bank approved the loan. Sloane, a major financial institution, approved the transfer of funds. They have rigorous security measures in place. They would never process a massive secondary mortgage based on forged signatures and a fake notary stamp. "You are making up this entire ridiculous story to ruin our holiday dinner and humiliate the golden child of this family. I will not sit here and listen to these vile, disgusting accusations for another second. I am calling the bank manager first thing tomorrow morning, and I am going to have you prosecuted for corporate espionage and slander." I did not speak. I simply leaned back in my chair and looked at the man sitting quietly to my right. Marcus had remained perfectly still for the entire evening. He had patiently observed the chaotic unraveling of Gavin and his fraudulent empire. He had watched my parents fiercely defend their abuser while aggressively attacking the messenger. Now he smoothly unbuttoned his tailored charcoal suit jacket. The movement deliberately exposed the polished silver detective badge securely clipped to his leather belt. The sudden visual confirmation of law enforcement authority instantly drained the oxygen from the room. Patricia choked on her next breath. William gripped the edge of the table, staring at the badge in absolute terror. Marcus leaned forward and rested his forearms on the oak table. He looked directly at Patricia with the cold, clinical gaze of a seasoned investigator. "Actually, Madam," Marcus stated evenly. His voice was calm, authoritative, and completely devoid of any emotion. "The bank did not approve the loan blindly. They flagged it as highly fraudulent 3 weeks ago during a routine secondary internal audit. They caught the forged signatures and the unregistered notary stamp almost immediately." Patricia opened her mouth to argue, but Marcus raised a hand, silencing her instantly. The compliance department recognized the blatant wire fraud and the identity theft. Marcus continued. His words were precise and devastating. "But they did not report the felony to the local police department yet. They decided to bypass standard law enforcement protocols because the bank quietly sold the toxic debt to a private restructuring firm." Simone stared at the silver detective badge gleaming brightly under the massive crystal chandelier. The polished metal completely shattered the illusion of her aristocratic existence. She turned her gaze slowly toward Gavin. Her husband was actively hyperventilating and refusing to meet her eyes. The realization hit her with the brutal force of a runaway train. Her perfectly curated country club lifestyle was funded by stolen equity and blatant wire fraud. She let out a sharp, guttural scream that echoed violently off the dark mahogany walls. She grabbed her heavy linen napkin and hurled it directly at his face. The expensive fabric struck his cheek, but he did not even flinch. He just sat there looking utterly pathetic. "You lied to me!" Simone shrieked. Her voice cracked with absolute hysteria. "You told me the investments were paying off. You told me we were aggressively upgrading the portfolio. You forced my unsuspecting in-laws to take out a fraudulent mortgage just so you could pretend to be a financial genius. Everyone at the club thinks we are incredibly wealthy. Everyone thinks you are a mastermind. I have been proudly parading around town spending money that rightfully belongs to your parents. You are a complete monster. You have utterly ruined my life and destroyed the future of our only son." She pushed her chair back violently and scrambled away from him. The heavy oak legs scraped loudly against the polished floorboards. She moved quickly around the large dining table until she was standing just a few feet away from me. Her Chanel tweed jacket suddenly looked suffocating. The expensive designer makeup was running down her cheeks, mixing with hot tears of pure terror. She clasped her trembling hands together in front of her chest. She looked down at me with wide, desperate eyes. "Sloane, please, you have to believe me," Simone pleaded. Her voice dropped to a pathetic whisper. "I swear to you, I had absolutely no idea he was forging legal documents behind my back. I had zero knowledge about the cryptocurrency losses or the illegal secondary mortgage. He handles all the banking, he manages all the accounts. I just blindly sign where he tells me to. You have to help me right now. If the country club board of directors finds out about the vehicle repossession, they will terminate our elite membership immediately. My entire social standing will be permanently destroyed. The seasonal dues for the upcoming quarter are exactly $20,000, and they are strictly required by Monday morning. Please, Sloane. You have millions sitting securely in your corporate accounts. You can easily cover the club dues just until I figure out how to legally handle this massive domestic disaster. I simply cannot lose my status. I will be an absolute laughingstock in my own community." I looked up at her with absolute unwavering disdain. The sheer unmitigated audacity of her request was genuinely staggering. I slowly placed my hands flat on the polished table. My tailored emerald green suit felt like impenetrable armor against her desperate, pathetic energy. I did not offer a single ounce of sympathy. "You sat there exactly 10 minutes ago telling me I was a selfish, unrefined spinster," I stated coldly. My voice was perfectly measured and totally merciless. "You aggressively demanded that I hand over $18,000 of my hard-earned corporate wealth to fund your fraudulent lifestyle under the ridiculous guise of unconditional family loyalty. You treated me like a defective broken accessory while proudly parading around this private room pretending to be untethered royalty." I slowly shook my head side to side. "Look at yourself, Simone. Your heavy gold Rolex is a cheap counterfeit replica you bought to impress shallow women who secretly hate you. Your luxury sports car is currently sitting inside a heavily guarded repossession lot because you cannot afford the basic monthly lease payments. Your husband is an active felon who knowingly stole $250,000 from his own elderly parents just to keep your ridiculous country club charade alive for a few more months. We are completely finished here. You are not a victim in this scenario. You are a highly willing participant in his financial delusions. We are not allies. I will never give you a single penny to fund your pathetic vanity." Simone let out a loud, choked sob and buried her face deeply in her manicured hands. She staggered backward away from the table, completely broken and thoroughly humiliated. William sat frozen in his high-backed leather chair, watching his precious daughter-in-law collapse in front of him. Patricia was rapidly hyperventilating while clutching her pearls with a terrifyingly white-knuckled grip. Gavin watched his devastated wife retreat to the far, shadowy corner of the private dining room. The crushing public humiliation finally triggered a massive defensive rage deep inside his chest. The cornered animal instinct completely took over his rational thoughts. He violently slammed both his shaking hands onto the table and pushed himself forcefully to his feet. He glared at me across the expensive scattered china and the spilled vintage champagne. His face was twisted into an incredibly ugly mask of desperate, unearned arrogance. He pointed a violently shaking finger directly at my chest. "It does not matter," Gavin shouted. His voice was loud and aggressively defiant. "You honestly think you have me permanently trapped, but you are completely wrong. You brought your fake undercover cop here to intimidate me, but it changes absolutely nothing about my situation. The large estate house is still legally registered entirely in Mom and Dad and their personal names. You cannot legally touch us or my immediate family. You possess absolutely no legal authority over their private property or their banking finances. They are the sole rightful owners of the massive estate. If the commercial bank flagged the secondary mortgage as fraudulent, they will just simply reach out to my parents directly to resolve the issue. The bank will just immediately renegotiate the specific loan terms to protect their valuable asset. I watched Gavin desperately cling to his final pathetic lifeline. His chest heaved with exertion and his face was slick with terrified sweat. He genuinely believed that the massive institutional bureaucracy of a regional bank would somehow swoop in and shield him from the consequences of his felony. I let his arrogant declaration hang in the heavy air of the private dining room for a long moment. The silence was absolute and completely suffocating. Even the ambient noise from the main restaurant seemed to have vanished entirely. I did not raise my voice or mirror his frantic energy. I simply offered him a slow, perfectly measured smile that contained absolutely zero warmth. "You have always been remarkably short-sighted, Gavin," I stated calmly. "You possess a spectacular inability to see the board beyond your own immediate selfish moves." I reached into the deep center pocket of my black leather portfolio for the absolute final time tonight. My fingers closed around a thick stack of heavyweight legal paper bound by a heavy silver clasp. I pulled the document out and held it up under the bright glare of the crystal chandelier. The thick embossed seal of a major corporate holding company caught the light. "This is not a standard bank statement or a copied mortgage agreement," I explained smoothly. "This is a highly classified corporate acquisition record. You are operating under the incredibly naive assumption that Oak Creek Mutual still possesses any vested interest in your fraudulent secondary mortgage," I continued. My voice was sharp and totally uncompromising. "Regional lenders do not waste their valuable time or extensive corporate resources renegotiating toxic stolen equity with desperate felons. When they uncover massive wire fraud and blatantly forged signatures, they immediately package those highly contaminated liabilities and sell them off at a steep discount to aggressive institutional buyers. They purge the financial poison from their official ledgers." I tapped my manicured index finger twice against the silver clasp binding the papers together. "The bank is never going to renegotiate those loan terms with you, Gavin. They are not going to return your frantic phone calls tomorrow morning. They are not going to send a friendly loss mitigation specialist to sit down and work out a convenient payment plan to save your fake country club lifestyle. The bank no longer owns the mortgage on the family estate." I stared directly into his panicked wide eyes and watched the very last shred of his arrogant delusion die. My corporate restructuring firm quietly purchased the entire distressed debt portfolio from the regional lender yesterday afternoon at exactly 3 o'clock. I placed my hand firmly over the heavy legal packet and slowly pushed it across the long table. The thick paper glided smoothly over the polished wood and stopped perfectly centered between William and Patricia. The bold black lettering on the cover page clearly identified it as a formal deed of assignment. I leaned forward slightly, resting my elbows on the table and lacing my fingers together. "I own the debt," I announced softly. The absolute lethality of my words echoed in the quiet room. "I hold the complete secondary mortgage to your massive suburban estate, Mom and Dad. I am the sole legal entity in possession of the $250,000 liability that your golden boy secretly strapped to your home." Patricia stared down at the documents as if they were a live explosive device. Her mouth opened and closed, but she could not force a single sound through her paralyzed vocal cords. William looked completely physically ill. His large hands gripped the arms of his heavy chair so tightly his knuckles were stark white. And because Gavin completely drained his liquid assets to cover his pathetic cryptocurrency gamble, he has entirely defaulted on the required monthly loan payments, I stated with brutal precision. He has not paid a single dime toward this specific debt in over 6 months. I watched their eyes desperately search the meticulously drafted legal text, hoping for some kind of magical loophole that simply did not exist. The stark reality of their catastrophic financial ruin was documented right there in undeniably permanent black ink. The profound reality of the situation finally crashed down upon my parents. The massive protective wall of denial they had built around their precious son completely shattered into a million jagged pieces. They slowly turned their heads to look at Gavin. The golden child was currently clutching his chest and rapidly hyperventilating. He backed away from the table, stumbling clumsily against a heavy wooden serving cart. His knees buckled slightly, and he looked like a terrified child who had just been caught stealing. Simone let out another sharp, muffled sob from the dark corner of the room, but nobody paid her any attention. The entire power dynamic of the family had been irrevocably, violently inverted in a matter of minutes. William turned his devastated gaze back to me. His eyes were wide with a newfound, terrified respect. "What exactly does this mean, Sloane?" he asked. His voice was a weak, pathetic rattle, completely stripped of its usual booming authority. "It means that the financial leverage is no longer theoretical," I replied smoothly. My tone was dangerously even and perfectly controlled. "It means that the severe consequences of his felony are now fully active and entirely under my personal corporate jurisdiction." I pushed my chair back and slowly stood up from the table, looking down at the people who had consistently treated me like a disposable afterthought for my entire life. "I initiated formal legal foreclosure proceedings this morning at 8 o'clock sharp," I stated. The absolute finality of the declaration hit the room like a physical shockwave. "Your massive, lavish house belongs to me now. Every single brick and every perfectly manicured lawn is mine. You foolishly gambled your entire foundation on a proven liar, and now you must pay the ultimate price for your absolute blinding ignorance today. You have exactly 30 days to vacate my property." The severe shock finally broke her. Patricia's knees gave out. She collapsed onto the expensive Persian rug beneath the heavy oak table. Her heavy pearl necklace clattered sharply against the edge of the polished wood as she fell forward. The arrogant, aristocratic facade she had meticulously maintained for decades instantly dissolved into raw, pathetic desperation. She aggressively grabbed the hem of my tailored emerald green suit jacket with her trembling, heavily ringed hands. "Sloane, please," Patricia sobbed. Her voice was a wet, frantic gasp that echoed loudly in the quiet room. "You cannot do this to us today. This is our beautiful home. This is the house where we proudly raised you. We are your biological family. You have to forgive us right now." I honestly did not realize what Gavin was doing behind closed doors. We just desperately wanted to quietly protect him from public embarrassment. "You have millions of dollars sitting in corporate bank accounts and we have absolutely nothing left. Please just tear up those official papers and let us go back to normal." I looked down at the weeping woman who had spent my entire existence making me feel completely invisible. I did not reach out to comfort her. I did not offer a single ounce of sympathy. I gently but firmly pulled my expensive jacket out of her desperate grasp and took one deliberate step backward, away from the chaotic, pathetic mess she had created. William violently kicked his heavy leather dining chair out of his way. The chair crashed loudly against the wall. His red face was a terrifying mask of pure, unhinged fury. He pointed a thick, trembling finger directly at my calm, unbothered face. "You are an ungrateful monster," William roared. His booming voice violently shook the crystal champagne glasses remaining on the table. "You will sign that official property deed back over to us immediately. You will call your fancy corporate lawyers right now and permanently transfer that secondary mortgage back into my personal name. We gave you absolutely everything. We happily fed you and clothed you every single day and provided the most critical foundation for your massive financial success. You personally owe us this beautiful house, Sloane. You have zero legal right to maliciously walk into a private family holiday dinner and steal our property just to brutally punish your own brother." I remained utterly impassive. I stared at my furious father with the exact same cold, calculating expression he had always used to casually dismiss my childhood achievements. "I do not owe you a single thing, Dad," I stated evenly. My steady voice cut through his unhinged rage like a surgical scalpel. "I bought this toxic debt legally through my corporate restructuring firm. I did not steal your property today. Gavin actively stole your home equity, and I simply purchased the contaminated liability. You intentionally brought me to this fancy restaurant tonight for one specific reason. You wanted to blindly ambush me at Christmas to pay for his incredibly pathetic life. You knew he was completely broke. You knew his luxury vehicles were being actively repossessed by aggressive recovery agents. You actively planned to maliciously manipulate my familial loyalty and bleed my bank accounts dry to quietly cover his catastrophic financial crimes. I just beat you to the punch. You expected me to eagerly write a massive corporate check to save your fragile golden boy from his own staggering incompetence. You mercilessly threw me to the wolves every single time Gavin needed a quick bailout. When he carelessly crashed his first expensive sports car, you instantly drained my savings account to buy him a brand new one. When he failed out of his first prestigious university, you heavily leveraged my dedicated college fund to pay for his private academic tutors. You have spent 30 years happily sacrificing my personal security to continuously build his grand illusion. William opened his mouth to shout another aggressive command, but I immediately raised my right hand and silenced him completely. Do you vividly remember my sophomore year of college, Dad? I asked softly. I was working 3 brutal minimum wage jobs just to afford my basic textbooks because you absolutely refused to help me financially. When I could not afford the monthly rent for my tiny off-campus apartment, I called you desperately begging for a tiny short-term loan so I would not get legally evicted. You loudly laughed at me over the telephone. You coldly told me that real estate is an incredibly brutal game and I just needed to figure it out on my own. I smiled a razor-sharp smile. Well, Dad, I finally figured it out. Welcome to the brutal game. Gavin stood completely frozen near the heavy wooden serving cart. The horrific reality of his impossible situation finally pierced through his thick layer of desperate, unearned arrogance. He stared blankly at the undeniable forgery evidence sitting plainly on the table. He looked over at Detective Hayes standing calmly near the exit. He looked at the weeping parents he had secretly bankrupted. He realized with absolute clarity that I held the fraudulent debt, and I possessed the direct evidence of his massive felony. The severe magnitude of the legal consequences suddenly crushed him. He had absolutely zero remaining moves to play on this chessboard. The bank would never quietly sweep this criminal situation under the expensive rug. I was never going to magically rescue him from the very trap he built with his own 2 hands. The comfortable, protected bubble he had selfishly lived in for his entire life was completely gone. He was definitely going to federal prison. The thought of being permanently locked inside a cold, concrete cell paralyzed his legs for one final second. A high-pitched, pathetic squeal escaped his tight throat. He spun around wildly, abandoning his crying wife and his devastated parents. He bolted blindly toward the heavy mahogany doors of the private dining room. He was running for his life. Gavin hit the heavy mahogany doors with his shoulder, but they did not budge. Detective Hayes had moved with terrifying tactical precision. He firmly planted his large frame directly in front of the exit, blocking the only escape route. Gavin bounced off the detective's solid chest and stumbled backward. His expensive Italian leather shoes scrambled for traction on the polished hardwood floor. Hayes did not even flinch. He reached inside his tailored suit jacket and pulled out a genuine gold police badge. The heavy metal caught the light of the crystal chandelier, casting a harsh glare across Gavin's terrified face. Hayes held the badge up high, making sure every single person in the room could see his official credentials. "You are not going anywhere," Gavin Hayes stated. His voice was a booming baritone that completely commanded the chaotic room. "Sloane handles the civil side of this massive disaster, but I am here in my strictly official law enforcement capacity." Hayes reached into his inner pocket again and produced a sharply folded legal document. He snapped it open with a crisp flick of his wrist. "I hold an active criminal arrest warrant issued by the state authorities," Hayes announced. He read the charges with brutal, methodical clarity. "You are hereby placed under arrest for first-degree wire fraud and aggravated identity theft. Furthermore, because your parents are over the age of 65, you are being officially charged with the felony financial exploitation of the elderly." The severe weight of those specific words dropped over the dining table like a suffocating lead blanket. Gavin let out a pathetic whimper. His entire body trembled violently as Hayes swiftly grabbed his wrists and twisted his arms behind his back. The sharp metallic click of the heavy steel handcuffs locking into place echoed fiercely around the private dining room. It was the absolute undeniable sound of a ruined life. The heavy mahogany doors suddenly swung open from the outside. A team of immaculate waitstaff dressed in pristine white uniforms stood frozen in the hallway, holding silver trays of expensive appetizers. They stared in absolute shock at the wealthy country club patron currently being restrained like a common street criminal. The sheer public humiliation instantly shattered Simone. She did not cry out of love for her husband. She did not rush forward to comfort the father of her child. Instead, she unleashed a piercing hysterical wail, entirely born of pure social terror. Simone aggressively covered her face with her manicured hands and shrieked about the absolute embarrassment of being exposed in front of the elite Michelin star waitstaff. "You are completely destroying our reputation," Simone screamed at Gavin. "Everyone at the country club will hear about this humiliating disaster by tomorrow morning. I can never show my face at the seasonal charity gala again. You are a disgusting embarrassment." As the chaotic reality of Gavin going to federal prison settled over the room, the entitled nephew Mason finally spoke up. He had been sitting silently in the corner scrolling on his expensive smartphone while his entire family structure collapsed. He slowly lowered his device and stared at the handcuffed man. Mason did not look concerned about his uncle facing a massive felony conviction. He looked entirely annoyed by the financial inconvenience. "So wait," Mason asked loudly. His voice was thick with unearned teenage arrogance. "If you are going to prison and your bank accounts are totally frozen, who exactly is paying to refill my cryptocurrency investment account? I lost $20,000 yesterday, and you promised to wire me the replacement funds tonight." I slowly turned my head and looked directly at Mason. I stared at the spoiled teenager who genuinely believed the universe owed him a constant stream of effortless wealth. I did not offer him a polite explanation. I did not try to gently correct his spectacular delusion. I simply tilted my head back and let out a loud, genuine laugh. The sound of my dark amusement cut sharply through the heavy tension of the room. It was cold and totally devoid of sympathy. "Nobody is funding your digital gambling addiction, Mason," I stated clearly. "The fraudulent gravy train has officially derailed. I highly suggest you learn how to submit a standard job application because your free ride is permanently over." Detective Hayes forcefully grabbed Gavin by the bicep and marched him toward the exit. Gavin kept his head bowed, staring at the expensive floorboards in absolute defeat. He did not say goodbye to his parents. He did not apologize to his screaming wife. He just shuffled forward like a broken, empty shell. As the police detective escorted the crying felon out into the main restaurant, Simone frantically scrambled into action. She snatched her heavy quilted handbag from the back of her chair. The harsh restaurant lighting highlighted the cheap stitching on the fake Chanel bag I had accurately identified earlier. She aggressively shoved past the stunned waitstaff and sprinted out the door right behind her arrested husband. She completely ignored Gavin. She had already pulled out her phone and was loudly demanding that her divorce lawyer answer her call immediately. The heavy doors swung shut, leaving the private dining room in absolute dead silence. The scattered fine china and spilled vintage champagne sat completely ignored on the long table. Patricia and William remained frozen in their high-backed leather chairs. They looked completely hollowed out. The arrogant, aristocratic glow that usually radiated from their faces had been entirely extinguished. The severe reality of their catastrophic financial ruin had finally taken root in their minds. Their golden boy was on his way to a cold jail cell, and their massive suburban estate legally belonged to the daughter they had spent a lifetime treating like absolute garbage. William stared blankly at his empty hands. Patricia let out a shaky, pathetic breath. "Where are we supposed to live?" Patricia whispered. Her voice was a fragile, broken croak. We have absolutely nowhere to go, Sloane. We are completely ruined. I slowly sat back down in my tailored emerald green suit. I reached for my crystal water glass and took a slow, deliberate sip. I let them suffer in the agonizing uncertainty for a long, terrible moment. I watched them mentally pack their belongings and picture themselves sleeping in a cheap motel. I won't kick you out of the house, I stated calmly. The words hung in the air, holding a massive, unexpected reprieve. You can stay in the estate. Patricia immediately burst into a fresh wave of heavy sobbing. She clasped her hands together and looked at me with wild, desperate gratitude. Oh, thank you, Sloane, Patricia cried. She desperately reached across the table, trying to grab my hand. I knew you had a good heart. I knew you would never throw your own elderly parents out onto the cold street. We will make this right. We will fix everything. William let out a massive breath, and his shoulders visibly slumped with intense relief. He actually managed to produce a weak, grateful smile. I pulled my hand back, resting it safely out of her reach. I did not return his smile. I stared at them with eyes like chipped ice, but I continued smoothly cutting off their pathetic celebration. You will sign a legally binding residential lease tomorrow morning. You will pay me fair market rent for the property every single month. You will cover the property taxes, the utility bills, and the massive landscaping costs. Your monthly rent will be strictly due on the first day of every single month. Grace periods do not exist in my corporate portfolio. If you are exactly 1 day late with the payment, I will instruct my legal team to evict you immediately. The relief instantly vanished from their pale faces. Patricia's grateful tears morphed into a look of absolute horror. She rapidly shook her head side to side. We cannot possibly afford the fair market rent for a house that size, Patricia protested wildly. You know exactly how expensive that massive property is to maintain. We are living on a fixed retirement income. Your father does not bring in large corporate bonuses anymore. We barely have enough liquid cash to cover our basic monthly groceries. How can you demand such an exorbitant amount from us? I leaned forward, resting my arms on the polished oak table. I looked directly into the terrified eyes of the woman who had happily allowed her son to steal my future. Then I highly suggest you get a job, Patricia, I replied coldly. My voice was perfectly steady and completely ruthless. I hear the local community coffee shop is actively hiring new baristas. The starting wage is minimum, but the scheduling is highly flexible. I know it very well because making cheap lattes paid for my entire college tuition when you completely abandoned me. It can easily pay your rent. Gavin hit the heavy mahogany doors with his shoulder, but they did not budge. Detective Hayes firmly planted his large frame directly in front of the exit, blocking the only escape route. Gavin bounced off the detective's solid chest and stumbled backward. His expensive Italian leather shoes scrambled for traction on the polished hardwood floor. Hayes did not even flinch. He reached inside his tailored suit jacket and pulled out a genuine gold police badge. The heavy metal caught the light of the crystal chandelier, casting a harsh glare across Gavin's terrified face. Hayes held the badge up high, making sure every single person in the room could see his official credentials. You are not going anywhere, Gavin Hayes stated. His voice was a booming baritone that completely commanded the chaotic room. Sloane handles the civil side of this massive disaster, but I am here in my strictly official law enforcement capacity. Hayes reached into his inner pocket again and produced a sharply folded legal document. I hold an active criminal arrest warrant issued by the state authorities, Hayes announced. He read the charges with brutal, methodical clarity. You are hereby placed under arrest for first-degree wire fraud and aggravated identity theft. Furthermore, because your parents are over the age of 65, you are being officially charged with the felony financial exploitation of the elderly. The severe weight of those specific words dropped over the dining table like a suffocating lead blanket. Gavin let out a pathetic whimper. His entire body trembled violently as Hayes swiftly grabbed his wrists and twisted his arms behind his back. The sharp metallic click of the heavy steel handcuffs locking into place echoed fiercely around the private dining room. It was the absolute, undeniable sound of a ruined life. The heavy doors suddenly swung open from the outside. A team of immaculate waitstaff, dressed in pristine white uniforms, stood frozen in the hallway, holding silver trays of expensive appetizers. They stared in absolute shock at the wealthy country club patron currently being restrained like a common street criminal. The sheer public humiliation instantly shattered Simone. She did not cry out of love for her husband. Instead, she unleashed a piercing hysterical wail entirely born of pure social terror. Simone aggressively covered her face with her manicured hands and shrieked about the absolute embarrassment of being exposed in front of the elite Michelin star waitstaff. "You are completely destroying our reputation," Simone screamed. "Everyone at the country club will hear about this humiliating disaster by tomorrow morning." As the chaotic reality of Gavin going to federal prison settled over the room, the entitled nephew Mason finally spoke up. He slowly lowered his device and stared at the handcuffed man. Mason did not look concerned about his uncle facing a massive felony conviction. He looked entirely annoyed by the financial inconvenience. "So wait," Mason asked loudly. "If you are going to prison, who exactly is paying to refill my cryptocurrency investment account?" I slowly turned my head and looked directly at Mason. I simply tilted my head back and let out a loud, genuine laugh. The sound of my dark amusement cut sharply through the heavy tension of the room. "Nobody is funding your digital gambling addiction, Mason," I stated clearly. "The fraudulent gravy train has officially derailed." Detective Hayes forcefully grabbed Gavin by the bicep and marched him toward the exit. Gavin kept his head bowed, staring at the expensive floorboards in absolute defeat. As the police detective escorted the crying felon out into the main restaurant, Simone frantically scrambled into action. She snatched her heavy quilted handbag from the back of her chair. The harsh restaurant ceiling lighting highlighted the cheap stitching on the fake Chanel bag I had accurately identified earlier. She aggressively shoved past the stunned waitstaff and sprinted out the door right behind her arrested husband. She completely ignored Gavin. She had already pulled out her phone and was loudly demanding that her divorce lawyer answer her call immediately. The heavy doors swung shut, leaving the private dining room in absolute dead silence. Patricia and William remained frozen in their high-backed leather chairs. They looked completely hollowed out. The arrogant, aristocratic glow that usually radiated from their faces had been entirely extinguished. Their golden boy was on his way to a cold jail cell, and their massive suburban estate legally belonged to the daughter they had spent a lifetime treating like absolute garbage. William stared blankly at his empty hands. Patricia let out a shaky, pathetic breath. "Where are we supposed to live?" Patricia whispered. Her voice was a fragile, broken croak. "We have absolutely nowhere to go, Sloane. We are completely ruined." I slowly sat back down in my tailored emerald green suit. I reached for my crystal water glass and took a slow, deliberate sip. I let them suffer in the agonizing uncertainty for a long, terrible moment. "I won't kick you out of the house," I stated calmly. "You can stay." Patricia immediately burst into a fresh wave of heavy sobbing. She clasped her hands together and looked at me with wild, desperate gratitude. William let out a massive breath, and his shoulders visibly slumped with intense relief. But I continued, smoothly cutting off their pathetic celebration. "You will sign a legally binding residential lease tomorrow morning. You will pay me fair market rent for the property every single month. If you are exactly 1 day late, I will instruct my legal team to formally evict you immediately." The relief instantly vanished from their pale faces. Patricia froze mid-sob. "We cannot possibly afford fair market rent," Patricia cried. "We are fully retired. We are living entirely on a strict fixed income. How can you demand such an exorbitant amount from us?" I buttoned my suit jacket. "Then I suggest you get a job," I replied coldly. "I hear the local coffee shop is hiring. It paid for my college, it can pay your rent." I did not wait around to watch my parents process their grim new reality as my residential tenants. I simply turned my back on their horrified, tear-stained faces and walked confidently out of the private dining room. The heavy, solid mahogany doors shut firmly behind me with a deeply satisfying click, completely sealing off the chaotic and pathetic mess of my former family. The main dining room of the exclusive Michelin star restaurant was quiet and perfectly ordered, holding an atmosphere of refined elegance. I walked directly to the impeccably dressed maitre d', standing politely at the front desk. My tailored emerald green suit felt like an impenetrable suit of armor. I pulled my solid corporate black card from my slim leather portfolio and handed it to him. "I am covering the entire bill for the private room," I stated smoothly. "Please add a strict 50% gratuity for your waitstaff." They truly had to endure an unfortunate amount of completely unearned arrogance tonight, and they handled the massive disruption with absolute professionalism. The maitre d' processed the massive charge without blinking an eye. He handed the heavy metal card back to me with a respectful nod. The entire financial transaction was completely effortless. It was a mere fraction of a rounding error in my overall financial ecosystem. I walked out the polished glass front doors and stepped into the crisp evening air. My sleek black town car was idling perfectly at the curb. The driver immediately stepped out and opened the heavy rear door for me. I slid into the luxurious leather back seat and let the door close, shutting out the ambient noise of the busy city street. The thick, insulated glass created a perfect silent vacuum. For the very first time all evening, I finally allowed myself to drop the impenetrable armor. I leaned my head back against the soft leather headrest and closed my eyes. The massive emotional weight of the night suddenly crashed down on my shoulders. I had just entirely dismantled my biological family. I had systematically destroyed my parents' financial security, stripped my brother of his fraudulent freedom, and forcefully evicted them from their lifelong delusion of superiority. A brief, sudden flash of deep, primal guilt flared in my chest. Society heavily conditions us to protect our blood relatives at absolutely any cost, regardless of the severe damage they inflict upon us. I opened my eyes and looked down at the thick stack of legal documents resting on my lap. The embossed corporate seal on the deed of assignment gleamed in the dim streetlights passing by the windows. My own fingers lightly traced the sharp edge of the expensive paper. The momentary guilt instantly vanished, completely replaced by cold, hard clarity. I did not destroy them. I simply stopped actively shielding them from the brutal consequences of their own actions. They completely destroyed themselves with their boundless greed and their relentless, blind favoritism. Gavin forged the documents and stole the money. My parents willingly enabled a felony to protect a carefully curated lie. I just finally held up an uncompromising mirror and forced them to look at the ugly reflection. I reached into my bag and pulled out my smartphone. The bright digital screen illuminated the dark interior of the town car. I opened my contact list and scrolled down until I found the contact labeled Mom. I stared at the name for a long fraction of a second. The familiar sting of childhood rejection bubbled up, but I forcefully pushed it back down. I pressed the edit button. This exact physical motion triggered a vivid, deeply buried memory. 5 years ago, I sat in a freezing, cramped apartment staring at this exact same screen. My mother had sent me a barrage of frantic, pleading text messages demanding that I take out a massive personal loan to cover Gavin's legal fees after his first major arrest. She had ruthlessly ordered me to take the financial hit because Gavin simply could not handle a tarnished record. I remembered the hot tears of pure betrayal streaming down my face as I deleted those demanding messages one by one. I had erased her words back then, but I had foolishly kept the connection alive, hoping she would eventually change. I was no longer that desperate, vulnerable girl endlessly begging for basic maternal scraps. I tapped the red delete contact button located at the very bottom of the bright screen. A small prompt instantly asked me to confirm the permanent deletion of the contact record. I pressed confirm without a single ounce of hesitation or lingering regret. The name Mom vanished entirely from my digital ecosystem forever. I explicitly replaced the lifelong toxic dynamic with pure, absolute silence. They were no longer my family in any capacity. They were simply my residential tenants and my financial debtors. The sleek black town car glided very smoothly through the glowing city streets, carrying me further and further away from the suffocating shadows of my past life. I took a deep, long, cleansing breath. The heavy, oppressive air of my childhood was finally completely gone. Suddenly, the phone resting in my hand buzzed sharply twice in rapid succession. I glanced down at the bright notification banner flashing across the illuminated lock screen. It was an urgent, high-priority email from the senior executive board at my restructuring firm. I tapped the screen and opened the long message. The bold, black text detailed the massive, unmitigated success of the regional bank debt acquisition. The executive board was absolutely thrilled with the aggressive, flawless execution of the complex asset integration protocol. I scanned the final paragraph, and a genuine, triumphant smile spread widely across my face. Due to my outstanding performance and my completely ruthless acquisition strategies, the board was officially promoting me to managing partner, effective immediately. I locked the phone and looked out the window at the towering modern skyscrapers passing by outside. I had finally won the brutal game. 6 months passed with the ruthless efficiency of a corporate merger. The dust finally settled over the ruins of the illustrious family legacy, leaving behind a completely altered landscape. Gavin traded his tailored designer suits and luxury sports cars for standard-issue federal prison khaki. The judge had been entirely unamused by his arrogant display during the sentencing hearing and handed down a mandatory 3-year sentence in a federal correctional facility for wire fraud and elderly exploitation. His massive ego was currently being dismantled daily within the rigid confines of a concrete cell block. He was no longer the untouchable golden boy who could simply charm his way out of every disastrous mistake. He was just another inmate serving time for a white-collar felony. Simone experienced a similarly spectacular descent from high society. Without Gavin's fraudulent financial pipeline and with her own lavish spending habits thoroughly exposed, she was forced to officially file for Chapter 7 bankruptcy. The Elite Country Club board held an emergency meeting and voted unanimously to revoke her membership, citing the public embarrassment of her husband's arrest in their private dining room. She was unceremoniously ousted from the only social circle she valued. She currently lived in a cramped 2-bedroom apartment, desperately trying to maintain the illusion of wealth on a heavily restricted budget. Patricia and William experienced the most profound reality check of all. True to my absolute ultimatum, they signed the ironclad residential lease the morning after the ambush. They quickly discovered that fair market rent on a massive suburban estate was a staggering monthly liability. With their credit entirely destroyed and their savings depleted by Gavin's initial legal defense retainers, they had absolutely no choice but to enter the traditional workforce. My father, the former aristocratic executive, secured a position as a greeter at a local hardware supply store. My mother, the proud socialite, was currently folding discounted clothes at a mid-tier retail outlet in the local shopping mall. They worked brutal, agonizing hours on their feet simply to ensure their rent payment hit my corporate account by the first of every month. I did not keep a single penny of their hard-earned retail wages. The moment their rent transfer cleared my corporate accounts, the funds were automatically diverted. I established a dedicated financial literacy scholarship for underprivileged girls. Every single dollar my parents paid to live in the house they once owned exclusively funded the higher education of young, ambitious women striving for permanent financial independence. I essentially transformed their toxic, lifelong financial manipulation into a powerful engine for genuine upward mobility. I conducted my mandated semi-annual property inspection on a rainy Tuesday afternoon. I pulled my sleek town car into the long, sweeping driveway and stepped out wearing a sharp charcoal business suit. I did not knock on the heavy front doors. I simply unlocked them with my master key and stepped inside the grand foyer. Patricia and William stood nervously by the curved wooden staircase. They wore their polyester retail uniforms and looked utterly exhausted. Their eyes, previously filled with relentless judgment and cruel dismissiveness, now held a mixture of deep fear and reluctant respect. They recognized with absolute clarity that I held their entire existence in the palm of my hand. I did not gloat. I did not offer a single sarcastic comment about their spectacular downfall. I treated them exactly like any other random residential tenants in my vast real estate portfolio. I walked methodically through the house, checking the structural integrity of the walls, inspecting the plumbing fixtures, and noting the condition of the expensive hardwood floors. I even walked into Gavin's old bedroom, meticulously checking the window seals, while my parents watched in total silence. When Patricia attempted to offer me a cup of fresh coffee on a silver tray, trying to bridge the massive emotional chasm between us, I simply raised my right hand to stop her completely. "I am strictly here for the property inspection, Patricia," I stated coldly. "Maintain the landscaping and ensure the HVAC filters are replaced by Friday." I turned and walked out the front door without looking back. I left them standing silently in the foyer of the house they rented from the daughter they discarded. Later that evening, I stood on the expansive glass balcony of my downtown penthouse apartment. The cold city wind whipped my hair back as I looked out over the glittering metropolitan skyline. The towering skyscrapers pulsed with electric light, representing endless ambition and absolute corporate power. I gripped the smooth metal railing and took a deep breath of the crisp night air. I had successfully turned the ultimate familial betrayal into my greatest financial and emotional triumph. They had spent my entire life treating me like an invisible liability and bleeding me dry to fund their golden illusion. I had taken their relentless cruelty and forged it into an unbreakable weapon. I was now the sole owner of their estate and entirely free from their toxic gravitational pull. The heavy, suffocating chains of familial obligation had been permanently shattered. The vicious generational cycle of financial abuse and emotional manipulation was broken forever. I looked down at the bustling city streets far below me, watching the tiny cars navigate the chaotic traffic intersections. I raised a crystal glass of expensive vintage champagne to my lips and took a slow, deliberate sip. The cool liquid tasted like pure, unadulterated victory. I had systematically dismantled the very people who tried to destroy my future. I had survived the wolves and emerged as the apex predator. I had flawlessly conquered the brutal game of life. Suddenly, my smartphone vibrated softly inside my pocket. I pulled it out and quickly checked the screen. It was an official email from the managing partners at my elite restructuring firm. The hostile asset acquisition was a massive historical success. They were promoting me immediately. I smiled. I was finally and completely untouchable in every single way.
I used to ride upon your shoulders, thinking you could touch the sky. Every road felt less uncertain when I saw the world through your eyes. You were stronger than the mountains, taller than the northern pines. And when the winter winds were coming, you would stand between them and I. Time kept moving like the river, years slipped slowly out to sea. But no matter where life took me, you were always part of me. I am my father's daughter, in every step I take, in every time I choose to stand. When it's easier to break, I carry your courage in my heart, your fire inside my soul. And though the years keep moving on, your love still leads me home. You taught me strength is not in power, but in kindness when it's hard. You taught me how to keep on going when the road drives me home. One day the snow will cover footprints, one day the fire will burn low, but the things a father gives his daughter are the things that never go. Not the gold or not the stories, not the battles that he won, but the quiet way he loved her and the woman she becomes. I am my father's daughter, and I always will remain through every triumph, every loss.